Hello and welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. So happy that you decided to tune in and join us for another great edition today. Today we are joined by Ike Devji, and he is with Pro Asset Protection right here in the Valley. And we are speaking about economy. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ike.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. You've been on once before. Always great information that you have to share. And so I know that our viewing audience will. If you don't have a pen and paper, I would suggest you grab one before we get started, because there will be some great things for you to take notes on. But before we even get started with that, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, what you do, how long you've been doing it, anything you'd like.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm an attorney, and the sole focus of what I do is called asset protection planning. So you're familiar with estate planning, right? Mm-hmm. Which is who gets my possessions, the fruits of my life's labor when I pass. And that is what we call death planning, whereas asset protection is the life planning side. How do I manage, control, and protect all of the things that I've worked so hard for myself and my family during my life? That's what I do for a living, is I am a bodyguard for successful people's assets, to put it in the bluntest terms. So we protect their businesses, their homes, their investments, their real estate. And the best way to do that, like with health or like with most other things, is proactively.
And so how long have you been doing this, Ike?
I've been practicing exclusively in this area for the last 11 years.
Wow.
And my associates and I work with clients all over the country. We work with a few thousand physicians, another few thousand business owners, some pro athletes, some executives. It's a very wide range of people. Many of them are people who own the businesses that you or I might patronize every day. It could be our doctor or the person who owns the restaurant down the street that we like, or the contractor that built our home. Those are all the kinds of people that we work with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I know that you've been doing this a long time, and you also travel and speak, and you educate people on these very topics. And so this is something you're very proactive in every single day.
We try to be.
Yes, well, thank you for taking your time to be here today. And thank you so much at home for watching. Today, we are discussing economy, and our first topic is asset protection tips for everyone. And that being said, is asset protection something that is just for the very wealthy, or is this something that applies to really anyone who has a job and has developed any kind of thing or savings or anything?
Well, thanks for asking that. That's a great question. And I think that's one of the biggest misimpressions or myths out there, is that asset protection planning is only for very rich people. And of course, our clients, many of them are very successful. They're in the top 1%. But we also have a lot of people who what we might call everyday successful, what we might call working wealthy, or people who are on their way, people who have a dream of starting a business or doing something for their family and need to get there. And it's important that along the way they don't take a big step backwards. So the answer to your question is yes, this is something that everyone should do. What you need to do depends on what your risks are, what kind of assets you have, and your net worth and a number of other factors. But there is something for everyone. So in some cases, let's say we might start with something as simple as having the right kinds of insurance. It might be home insurance, auto insurance that's enough to cover the risks that people face. It could be disability and long-term care insurance that protect your income or protect you from the costs of health care. So some of these things are for millionaires and billionaires, and some of them are for all of us. And it's important that we examine that across the spectrum.
And you mentioned one thing, that's something that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration, because insurance, it seems like something that is almost a bothersome thing. Every month you have to pay this amount of money. And am I really ever going to use it? And is it really worth it to have insurance on this and on that and on long-term care and on all these different things? But if you outweigh, at least in your experience, have you seen that if you outweigh the monthly increments to what it costs if something does happen, it's probably much greater?
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. The cost of insurance for people who have specific risks is always outweighed by the costs of having an exposure without insurance. So in many cases, one of my clients might fuss with me about me making them want to get something we call EPLI insurance, which stands for Employment Practices Liability Insurance. So think of every single one of your viewers that watches your show that owns their own business and has employees. those employees statistically pose the greatest lawsuit risk to the person that owns that business than any other risk they face. Now, if you have somebody sue you, and let's say the average sexual harassment verdict in this country is over $500,000.
Wow.
Now, that would bankrupt many small businesses that were on their way or new, or even an established business. If it was a small business, many of the people watching might own a business that would be wiped out by a $500,000 verdict. So there are certain kinds of things that we want people to do, and there's a problem that we have with insurance. So number one, yes, everyone should buy as much insurance as they can afford for the risks that they face in a realistic sense, number one. Number two, we need to make sure that you have the right kinds of insurance. So one of the problems that we see with insurance is people say, I don't have to worry about that, I have an insurance policy. So for instance, like the employee lawsuit thing I told you about. And somebody might say, I don't have to worry about that because I have an umbrella insurance policy. Well, great, that umbrella covers your home and your automobile, but it doesn't cover the exposure that you face at the business you own. So it's not just making sure that people have insurance, but that they're educated about all of the different kinds and how much. So for instance, you drive a car every day, I'm guessing, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In the city, you don't really have a choice.
Right,
But yes.
where we live, yeah. It's a little hot for a lot of public transport a lot of the time. So one of the things on your auto insurance is called uninsured and underinsured. Mm-hmm. The reason we have that is that somewhere between 20 and 30% of the people driving around us either don't have any insurance,
Wow.
or have liability only minimal insurance of $15,000 or $30,000 or whatever the lowest their carrier will issue is. So if you or I got hit by that person and they didn't have enough coverage to protect us on their end, even if it's their fault, from the medical bills that might ensue or from the property damage, you and I need to protect ourselves against that exposure of somebody else not having done the right thing or not having been able to afford enough by having our own uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. Now that sounds like an everyday thing, but that's part of asset protection too. We do a lot of very complex things that are sophisticated legal strategies. Some of them are domestic. We have offshore trusts. We have all of those things. But the basic stuff applies to all of us. And that's one issue. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense, and that's something to consider, because I know a lot of times that's an option that you can get on your insurance. It's not necessarily required to have uninsured or underinsured motorists, or is that something that's required now by the state?
It is part of the base policy of most policies, but how much you carry is something that you need to look at. And what we find is that most people don't have enough. And this affected somebody close to me. A friend's father was heading back from the west side of town on the freeway that goes past Lake Pleasant, and was hit head-on by somebody. And he had multiple fractures. He had a skull fracture, a neck fracture. He was cut out of his car. He was airlifted.
Oh my goodness.
He had $100,000 in medical coverage on his own insurance, and the other person had the minimum. This person spent a week in intensive care in the hospital. So he left the hospital in debt by over $100,000 for an accident that wasn't his fault. Now, if we're talking about a middle-class person who is trying to build their life and get some money saved and have some investments, or buy a rental home, or all of the things that people dream about doing as part of their financial plan, that could have wiped that person out. And, just in Arizona last year, 3 of the largest verdicts of the year were for auto accidents. And the highest one, I think, was close to $30 million.
Wow.
So this seemingly everyday things are as important as the big risks where a surgeon might worry about a medical malpractice lawsuit. He should be just as worried about his high school kids driving to school.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask you is, as an everyday person, somebody who works a 9-to-5 job and has a family and has 2 kids, what kind of risks come from, what should people consider that have children that are out driving or that are going to school or that are maybe getting into trouble or doing something? What kind of liability does a parent have?
Parents have a substantial degree of liability for the actions of their children when those children are up to the age of 18. In fact, I have an article that's on the internet your viewers can find called "Are Your Children a Lawsuit Exposure?" And in that article, we talk about all of the different kinds of exposure that children in particular generate. Now, we've seen the tragedies across the country with some of the mass shootings, for instance. We live in a state where a lot of people have guns in their home and have them responsibly. So part of that might be making sure that those things are controlled and locked up in a safe, or that you have insurance, that you have an umbrella policy on your homeowner's insurance. And I tell everybody that you should have at least a $1 million umbrella as the minimum, maybe more. And many people don't have it because they think it's too expensive. Our experience is that it adds just a few $100s a year for most people to the cost of their base policy, but gives them an extra $1 million worth of coverage on anything that happens at their house or with their car. Well, not anything, but many things,
Many
right?
things.
So is that $400 a year well spent? I think that's the first and most essential layer of asset protection there is. And if you come to me to have me do my high-level legal planning, I'm going to make sure that you have that as a start, because that's the first line of defense. So yes, children can pose many risks, and we see children involved in car accidents. We see children who have a party when mom and dad are away. That happens every weekend in every town in the United States. We see children who have had friends over and have accessed parents' prescription drugs that the mom or the father in the house legally and rightfully had and left in their medicine cabinet, and you didn't know that when your 14-year-old daughter had a party, one of the kids went in and took them and drank them with some alcohol that she wasn't supposed to have either. So all of these things come back to the person who owns the home.
Because the parent could sue the parents. The other child could sue them and for having children in their home and having access to those things.
That's exactly correct, and we see those kinds of lawsuits all the time. One of my clients, who's a very successful guy, left his home in the hands of his 17-year-old daughter one weekend after she begged and pleaded and convinced mom and dad that she was responsible enough to take care of the home. And they went away for just 2 days. And they said, okay, you're fine enough. She was 17, about to turn 18, and was a good kid. And a good kid from a nice neighborhood, from the best private school. All of the facts involved these are people who knew better, who don't get involved in these kinds of things, right? If we have stereotypes in mind about who does things and who doesn't do these things, these were what we would call bluntly rich, smart people. They went away, they left their kid at home for the weekend. She had a party. And a boy she'd never met before from another high school heard about the party and came to her home. He brought his own drugs with him, and he died in the backyard from an overdose.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, that tragedy speaks for itself. We don't need to say a lot about that. That's horrible, and our hearts obviously go out to the family of the young man who died. The other family, the family whose daughter threw the party, faced a tragedy themselves. Not only did they have that guilt and horror of having that happen at their home, they were then sued for $3 million by the boy's parents.
Oh, my goodness.
Because they had negligently entrusted the home, and
to a
there was
minor,
wrongful
and
death,
she was
and
under 18.
She had a party, and all of those
Oh, my
things.
goodness.
So that's a pretty common everyday thing. I mean, I'm not going to ask you about you, but I know that when I was in high school, I had a party or two at my house.
Yes, everyone does stupid things whenever they're young, unfortunately.
Right. And we feel invincible, and we don't think about the consequences, and we're thinking about, well, I'm responsible and I'm not going to do these things, and therefore nobody else is. And we are in the period, Vanessa, that they refer to as the 100 Deadliest Days. I don't know if you're aware of this. They refer to the time between Labor Day and Memorial Day as the 100 Deadliest Days, because the highest number of traffic fatalities involving teenagers happen during the summer, because kids are spending more time in the car, they are unsupervised, they are not under the usual time pressures of going from home to school to soccer practice and back to home where mom is waiting to look over their homework. They have more free time, they're out roaming around, they're doing more things with their friends, and so they call this the 100 Deadliest Days.
Goodness.
And so it's important that people, as part of asset protection, is protecting your life and your family and your personal security, is that they make sure they understand what their kids are doing, that maybe they have a code of conduct, that they take the vehicle away when the child isn't acting responsibly. And we're talking about one specific issue
Yes.
of teens driving. But there are 100 things that happen, and it's not just teenagers. I got several calls on this issue last year from people who had been in serious car accidents and whose insurance company called them and said, we want to inform you that the medical and property damage that incurred in this accident substantially exceeds the limits of the insurance you have in place.
Wow.
Then they called me for help, and at that point it's too late, because if we try and do asset protection planning after you get in trouble, that's what's called fraud.
Yes.
And it's illegal.
And then you lose your license
Right.
to practice law.
Exactly. And it's even worse for the people who try and do it.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, they pay a bad lawyer, or worse, a non-lawyer, for something they shouldn't have done. Then they face penalties for having done something they didn't have the legal right to do.
Oh my goodness.
And then they lose the case and have to pay anyway.
Wow. So it's being preemptive, and it's realizing that as an everyday individual, we all have liabilities consistently, whether it be children or driving, or we have a home or anything. Everything is a liability, and unfortunately in today's society, a lot of people do get sued. And so it's just being cognizant of what you're doing and of your home, and if you're working to build something, if you have a family, to be careful. So these are such wonderful, wonderful tips. Ike, thank you so much for staying with us for this first segment here on Joy in Our Town. And thank you so much at home for watching this first segment. Ike's information has been displayed periodically at the bottom of the screen. If you won't go anywhere, we'll be right back after this short message.
Does retirement have to wait until my 70s?
Is a great college for our kids?
Out of the question?
Is the American dream?
Out of our reach?
Not if we can help it. We're the National Endowment for Financial Education, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping people just like you get smart about their money. Log on to smartaboutmoney.org today and start taking control of your financial life.
Hello and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm Vanessa Rose. I'm your host, and so happy that you decided to stay with us. If you just happen to be joining us, today we are discussing economy, and we are here with Ike Devji. Thank you so much for staying with us here today, Ike.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Such great information that you've shared so far about how to protect yourself and the possible risks that face each and every single one of us every day, whether you be an average working person or whether you do have even more assets to protect. It's something that affects us all. So thank you for that. And for you watching at home, we are going to continue with economy, and our second topic is avoiding fraud at your business. This is something, there's a lot of small business owners in this country. That's one thing that makes America great, is the fact that we have so many people that can start a business and start to grow something to possibly become a big thing one day, and to be able to chase those dreams. However, fraud is a major problem in our society today. And so what kind of frauds are you worried about, and how big of a problem is it today?
Well, I think we need a whole day to cover all the different kinds of fraud that are out there and what we warn clients about, Vanessa. But there's some basic ones that we can certainly discuss. And a big part of the prevention is in having good policies and procedures in place, and we can talk about some of those details. But this costs American business owners, whether it be the little restaurant next door or the doctor's office down the street, or whoever we're dealing with, in some cases up to $100 billion a year.
Wow.
The numbers are staggering. This isn't a limited thing that just happens occasionally. It's something that businesses are bombarded with every day. And we know that there are many different ways, right? It could be invoicing fraud, where you're getting billed for something that you never got or didn't actually order and then was shipped to you with a bill. It could be embezzlement or theft by a partner or an employee. And there's some really interesting facts about that surprise a lot of people. It could be any number of things. So we need to just make sure that people who own a business have their business secured and are as particular about it and its record keeping as they are with protecting the PIN number on their debit card, right? That's something that you and I would never give to strangers.
No.
or make accessible. But there are businesses that do things that equate to almost the same thing every day without knowing it. And in some cases, it's something as simple as things related to computer security and having the right passwords or limiting access. So there are many different facets to this problem. We see statistically, a lot of people think that the wealthier or more financially successful a person is, or the higher paid they are, the less likely they are to steal. And stealing takes many forms, like we said, right? It could be stealing something from inventory. It could be padding their hours. That's stealing. It could be doing any number of things. And what we actually found when we did some research on this for our clients, because most of our clients, whether they're a doctor or do something else, own their own business, right? The majority of them are responsible for creating their wealth and employ other people. What we found statistically in national studies is that the higher the person is on the sort of corporate organizational food chain, the more they steal.
Wow.
So an administrative person might take 50,000, and a partner or an executive might take 400,000.
Wow.
Well, which of those is worse? I think morally they're probably equivalent.
Yes.
But obviously, from the perspective of the person that we want to protect, of your viewers that are listening, we know which one poses a bigger threat. But this is sort of the blinders that we have on, where we think, oh, that person is too nice, or they make too much money. Why would they do it? It must be the other person who gets paid less.
Wow.
And so we've asked our clients to look for financial red flags and behavioral red flags. So financial red flags might be, for instance, your viewers who own a business might want to be concerned and start looking at things more closely if they have unseasonal and non-traditional, that they've never experienced before, large drops in profits or in billing, or depending on what the business is. Are we talking about the receipts at a restaurant, or are we talking about the billings at a doctor's office, or it depends on what we're doing. We want to make sure that somebody looks at that regularly as one pattern. We want to see if there are large numbers of increased bills is another fact pattern for fraud that we look for, red flag, where you know that your monthly supplies cost $6,000 on average. Let's just say, I'm pulling a number out of the air, I'm making it up. And all of a sudden it starts to cost $8,500. Well, did all of our suppliers raise their prices? Or are we being billed for things that we never got? Or are they padding their bill? Or, even worse, that we're seeing increasingly, is somebody in our office writing checks for fake bills and taking those checks home?
Goodness.
So it comes from many different directions. So there are fact patterns that we have made specific lists of that I'd be happy to share with your viewers if they call me or email me, where I can send them a short bullet point list of, hey, here are some fact patterns that you need to look for in the business in terms of money or billing or receipts going in or out or things like that, that they need to be aware of.
And then habits. What are habits that you should look for as an employer?
Well, habits, behavior issues in fraud take two different forms. So first, let's talk about the one that parallels looking for the financial red flags that I was just talking about, like we made a lot less than usual or we spent much more than usual. There are personal financial red flags. For instance, has somebody started complaining about money problems all the time? Are they going through a situation of financial duress? Now, what I don't want is for everybody watching who owns a business to look suspiciously at the poor person at their office who is going through a bankruptcy or going through a divorce or going through any of these other things that we see that cause financial hardship and automatically assume that that person is going to do something. But I am saying that when we did a little research on this, we found that there are things that prompt people to make mistakes.
To make stupid decisions.
To make stupid decisions. We've also found that many of these people are doing this for the first time. So it's not that they're career criminals. It's somebody who was given, number one, the temptation. Number two, had some kind of reason, some kind of pressure. And number three, was provided an opportunity because the place they worked was sloppy and wasn't paying attention. So I tell my clients they should help people be their best and be honest by controlling what they have access to
Yes.
and keeping them honest by force, if you will, which is limiting temptation. Don't leave money lying around. Don't leave stacks of electronic equipment lying around that has loose inventory controls and anybody can walk off with. Don't leave the liquor cage at your restaurant unlocked where somebody can take a case and sell it. And these things sound petty, but they add up to, especially to a small business owner
Yes.
that might be watching you and I right now. I mean, a few $100s a week over the course of a year
could break a small business.
can absolutely break a small business.
So it's not trusting your employees, it's just being wise, and it's keeping checks and balances so that everyone is accountable and you're keeping the correct amount of accountability.
I'm thrilled you said that. Checks and balances are another really important way to control fraud and to, like I said, remove temptation and opportunity. What we've seen in many cases is that people who take advantage of a business this way often do so because they think no one else is looking. So let's say we have one charming lady who's our bookkeeper and she's in charge of all of the checks that are written and all of the billing that comes in. We want to make sure that at least periodically somebody is checking her work as well.
Yes.
And that system of checks and balances is another really simple, basic way to help protect yourself in your business.
And I know that Ike, if his information has been displayed at the bottom of the screen, I know you have all kinds of great articles and information on your website, so just look him up. I know they'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much, Ike, for joining us. Such great information, and thank you for watching Joy in Our Town.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and is made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town coming to your home every week. Write to Joy in Our Town, Post Office Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.